What's up? Coach Dan Blewett here. In today's video, we're going to talk about why I believe that youth players and amateur players should be allowed to call their own game. So coaches should not be calling pitches in amateur baseball. So if you're new to my channel, I'm Coach Dan Blewett. I do lots of videos on pitching, on mental training, on mindset, on strategy, on strength training and arm care, all that stuff. So if you're new to my channel, definitely hit the subscribe button and I'll see you here in the next video. So today, again, pitch calling. I don't know why this has been a historical part of baseball that coaches call pitches at pretty much every level until pro ball, but it just makes no sense to me. It's not how people learn. It's not the right way to help develop players. I'm not convinced that pitching coaches that call the game are actually very good at it. And so today I'm going to give you 15 reasons why I believe amateur coaches need to allow their pitchers to call their own game. Number one, youth baseball is not that hard. Now, granted, hitting a round ball with a round bat is the hardest thing to do in sports, right? So it sounds like I'm contradicting myself. But as a pitcher, you're throwing to kids who have to learn to hit a round ball with a round bat. And one of the common rebuttals to this argument that I found on Twitter was, oh, you're throwing these kids into the fire. You're throwing them to the wolves. It's like, I'm not throwing them to the wolves, letting them call their own game. When they have to throw a ball that then another kid who's learning to control his body, all this other stuff, he has to hit a round ball with a round bat, which is, again, reported to be the hardest thing to do in sports. Pitchers are succeeding even when they screw up, right? So look, especially in youth baseball, you're just throwing fastballs most of the time. You're just trying to throw strikes. You're just trying not to walk 5 batters in 4 innings. It just isn't that complicated where coaches need to slow the game down and get in between that and start calling pitches. Number 2, execution is by far the most important part of pitching. You can make the wrong pitch call. You go in when you probably should have gone out. You went up when you probably should have gone down. You went curveball when you probably should have gone fastball. But if you execute that pitch in a great location, you're almost always going to get the result that you wanted. So execution is vastly, vastly more important than the pitch call itself. Even if you make the right pitch call and you cough it up down the middle of the plate, doesn't matter because you didn't execute. So look, execution is way more important. We shouldn't be worrying so much about the pitch calls, especially in amateur baseball. Number 3, unless you're in college or unless it's high school where you see players all the time, there is like almost no scouting report on these players. Even if you have Game Changer where you see like their spreadsheet or their spray chart, all that stuff, it's not really giving you much useful information that as a coach you can say, oh, we're going to throw this kid a ton of curveballs or a ton of changeups or we're going to pitch them all away. It's not that important. And if it is that important, then you can just tell your kids, hey, look at this kid's spray chart. He pulls the ball a ton, so let's pitch him in a ton, right? Which is actually what you do rather than pitch them away, because typically when kids are pulling the ball a ton, they're pulling pitches on the outer half. So if you bust them in, they only pull stuff foul, and now their whole game is haywire. So I digress, but basically there isn't enough info in amateur baseball for us to be making these complex decisions that require the slowing the game down to call pitches in and out, up and down, all that stuff. Let the pitcher do it. It's not that big a deal. You don't have tons and tons of data where your scouting report is really going to be useful if you have a scouting report at all. I was a coach. I coached a high-level showcase team. We didn't have any useful scouting data. We just didn't. We were showing up at a tournament, playing 8 teams we didn't know before. Maybe we had their Game Changer chart, but that's not telling me how they swing. It's not telling me what these kids can do in the box. It's just telling me what's happened already over a sample size that's very, very small. So look, we got to get away from this idea that coaches have more intel. And if you do, share it with your players, let them make the decision. They're going to learn better that way. All right, next point. So this is not how people learn. It's not how they learn in the real life. In real life, you learn by doing and you learn by failing. And this is my next point. Everyone's talking about growth mindset in sports, right? Oh, you have to have this growth mindset where you want to learn and you learn from failure and failure is the best teacher. Well, a lot of the coaches that are saying that are hypocrites. If you're saying that failure is the best teacher, then you should be letting your players call pitches because they're going to make the wrong ones. And then guess what? They're going to give up home runs and doubles sometimes, and they're going to learn from that failure. But yet, even though the failure is the best teacher, lots of these coaches that are saying that are calling pitches and trying to control more than they need to control. So look, people learn by doing. Whether you're in school and you're doing a science experiment, whether you're a carpenter apprentice and you watch for a little bit, but then you get your saw, you get your hammer, you get your nails, and you start to make the thing. We learn by doing, we learn by messing up, we learn by failing. So we have to let our pitchers do that. And I promise you, because I've been a pitcher my whole life and I've been a pitching coach, we're not out there analyzing coach's game. Oh, coach has called a changeup. Now I wonder what I'm going to throw next. That's not how it works. When we're out there, coach calls a changeup. All right, changeup, and you just throw it. That thought process of why am I going to throw this changeup, or what's the next pitch I'm going to throw and why, we lose that when it's done for us. So it's not how people learn. It goes against the grain of the growth mindset and the failure being such a great teacher. It just goes counterproductive to all these values that we know are true and are good for ball players. So it's not how people learn. We need to let them throw it. Next, it's just an educated guess. There is no art and science. There's no hard art and science to pitch calling. It's all by feel. It's a lot like poker. I know that, all right, this guy fouled that ball off late, so I'm going to go fastball in because I have a pretty good idea if he couldn't catch up to that previous pitch and I hit my spot inside, I have a pretty good idea that I'm going to get a jam job grounder to the right side, or he's going to pop it up, or he's going to miss it. Maybe I'm 80% sure he'll pop it up, or I'm 20% sure he'll, pull it this way, but it's never certain. These are all just educated guesses. That's kind of how we do this. And so from the pitcher's vantage point, in conjunction with his catcher, who's also got a great vantage point, they can make much better educated guesses. From the dugout, I spent my whole life in a dugout, you can't see anything relevant. You see, okay, the hitter's on his front foot, whatever. You can't see when the catcher, catches the ball 2 inches off the plate. We whine about it from the dugout. We go, oh, where was that, Blue? You can't tell if it was a ball or a strike. You can tell if the catcher moved his mitt a little bit, but that's it. You are missing so much info from the dugout. It's just an educated guess anyway, and yet we're trying to interfere from the dugout when we're 60, 70, 80 feet away from the action itself, whereas the pitcher and the catcher, if we teach them right, are right there. They're observing everything. They should be allowed to make that decision when they have the best possible information, considering they're closer and they're watching and they have every bit of the best vantage point. So it just doesn't make sense that we're trying to interfere from so far away with this weird angle view where we really just can't see that much. Next, who's to say your team wouldn't win more games if you didn't call pitches? One of the things that I think we all completely miss about this coach calling pitches thing is that who's to say that coach is actually good at it? Who's to say that your team wouldn't be better if your coach, who calls a bad game, stopped calling a bad game for your team? Not everyone is good at calling pitches. I can promise you that. I played professional baseball. I've been around the game for a long time. Even amongst my peers, there were pro guys that weren't smart pitch callers. And when I was a college player, I didn't know anything about baseball. I just really didn't. I learned a lot in pro ball my last 5-6 years. And I know that if I was a high school guy at that point, or a college guy, and then I just jumped into the coaching world, I wouldn't known a third of what I actually know today about baseball. So now we're talking about guys with high school experience, or maybe they don't have any real legitimate baseball experience, and they're calling games for 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds who were probably better than they were. There's just this big disconnect. And who's to say that even in Division I baseball, these guys are calling good games? Because I promise you, there's a large percentage of them who are not. They're calling stupid pitches. They're making pitchers worse. This was the case, unfortunately, at my alma mater. The game that was called for me wasn't a good game for me. I learned this in pro ball. I learned what my strengths and weaknesses were, and I learned that, man, if I'd go back in college, if I was given more leeway, knowing what I know about myself, I would have done a lot better. That's just the way it is. And that's not me making an excuse for my 10-year-old or 10 years ago self. It's just a reality. Even at these big schools, they can't all be making good decisions. There's not. There's no certification for pitch calling. There's no checks and balances, except if your team sucks for 4 or 5 years, they get rid of everybody and they get a new whole set of coaches. But I know you probably don't want to hear that, but it's a reality. There's no one over your shoulder saying, hey, 13U coach, you don't call a very good game, you're not going to call it anymore. If you're the coach of the team, you get to do whatever you want. But again, who's to say that you're actually good at it? Going back to why people don't learn from it being done for them. Imagine that you're driving in your car and you don't have Google Maps. You're just driving through an unfamiliar town and you have directions to get to a friend's barbecue. And they say, hey, After the third stoplight, there's a big church on the left. It's red brick. Take a left, and then it's the third right after that, and then you'll see a pond, and you're going to snake around the pond, and then you'll see our driveway. You have to remember all those things, and you're gonna really focus on the roadmap and say, okay, I'm counting 3 stop signs, then it's second left, and then the big church, whatever. When you have Google Maps, by comparison, you're just listening. Take a left, you take a left. Take a right, you take a right. Take a right, you take a right, right? And you're there. And I know for a fact that when I am in a new town, because there's a lot of them when I was still playing, when Google Maps was driving me around, I was just cruising around, just in my own head, just spacing out, turning when it told me, and then suddenly I'm there. And I don't learn the city. I don't learn the road systems. It takes way longer because I'm not paying attention to any of it. And that's the same way when we're calling pitches for players. Fastball, slider, curveball, changeup, You're just cruising through it. You're not sitting there going, why did he throw a slider? Why did he call it changeup? Why would I throw a fastball away here? That's just not how we do it. It's just not how it works. Coaches, they defend themselves by saying that. They say, I'm just giving him the guide. He's out there. That's not how it works. You're just cruising along, just throwing the pitches and going. And you never really understand. You just don't see what's happening in front of you because you don't have to think about it. All you have to do is just pick the pitch and go. He picked it for me, so I go. So think of the Google Maps effect. I think that's a relevant analogy that when it's done for you, you just don't really learn. Next, when pitching coaches call the game, whose game are they calling? Do they intimately know what I throw and what I'm comfortable with, what I'm confident in that day, what's good for me, what's not good for me? They don't. As a pitching coach, you hope to know your players really well. As a head coach, you hope to know everything about every different pitcher and how they can get hitters out and what their unique way of getting hitters out is. But reality is it's probably not the case. And even then, we all have biases. So I was a high spin rate pitcher. I pitched up in the zone. I pitched inside. I beat guys with a really good curveball down. I didn't know how to get guys out with a sinker. I didn't throw a slider. I wasn't a command pitcher. I was more of just like a go after you, and I could throw strikes, but I'd go after you more in the middle of the plate kind of pitcher. So if you have me calling the game for a pitcher who's a finesse pitcher, who's very different than I was, I'm going to have biases. I'm always going to call more of a game like my game because that's what I know. That's who I was. And now, how do I call a game accurately for a finesse pitcher or for a lefty who's just like sinker slider? I didn't throw either of those pitches. A pitching coach has a staff of, 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 guys, depending on, the age group. And he's expected to instantly change his game, his pitch calling from one guy to the next, to the next, to the next, to get it right, to match their repertoire, to match their strengths and their weaknesses. It's a hard task. It's an impossible task. And so then, especially when you get coaches who are inexperienced at it, who aren't really good at pitch calling, now they're calling the guy who's a sinker slider game, they're calling his game the same as the way the guy who pitches up and finishes guys with curveball down. You have power pitchers pitching like finesse pitchers, or everyone's pitching the same as this power pitcher, whatever it is. They're all going to mush together. When each pitcher calls his own game, he's saying, what am I good at? What am I not good at? What am I confident in today? What am I not confident in? He's going to call his game, his unique game. And we take that away from them when we call it for them. Next, and this one seems like a trivial one, but I don't think it is. It slows the game down. Baseball has always been a slowish game, right? And now, after every pitch, catcher looks over, takes forever, or looks at his wristband thing. It just slows the game down, and we don't need that. Pitchers pitch better when they're moving fast. Infielders react best when they're engaged in the game, when the pitcher's moving fast. But when every pitch is a slog where we got to look at our armband, or we got to look over a coach, and then we got to give the sign, and then pitcher shakes, then we got to get another sign. It just takes forever. It's obnoxious. We don't need to do that. We can speed the game up. Everyone benefits when the game moves faster. My last two, if you're still here with me, number one, it's not affecting the outcomes in most games. Again, pitch calling, especially in amateur baseball, it's a really small sliver of why good teams win. Good teams win because they have really good athletes. They have good players with solid fundamentals. They hustle. They play hard. They play as a team. They're well coached. They're good timely hitters. They're good timely pitchers. There's so much more in baseball than that little sliver of pitch calling. Pitch calling is a smallish thing. And then when you realize that pitch calling, despite being a smallish thing, is an educated guess, and you still have to execute to even make that pitch a reality, which big league pitchers only hit their spot within 4 inches, I think 1 out of 5 times. So you're talking about amateur pitchers hitting their spot 1 out of 8 times, maybe 1 out of 10, like really hitting the mitt 1 out of 8 times. You're calling pitches and the kid's only going to hit that spot 1 out of 8. That's every 2 at bats. Like, what's the point? Just let them do it. And so we're just really not affecting games when we're calling pitches, especially at younger ages. These kids are going to learn, and there's a lot of kids who are going to be really smart and they're going to grow from it, and they're going to be good at calling their own game. That's the other thing. Just because we let them call it doesn't mean they're stupid, because pitchers aren't. They're not. We can let these kids and trust them, let them show how smart they can be, let them own it, and let them go with it. And then the last thing, I'm going to kind of roll two of them into one here. Number one, it's their career. It's not your career as a coach. It's their career. It was my career when I was a player. And I was very sensitive to this as a coach myself, which is I'm not out there pitching anymore. It's his game. It's his job. It's his career. If he's going to give up 6 runs today, it should be on the pitches that he wants to throw. And yeah, it's a team game, but every player does their individual job as best they can. And by letting him call his best game, it's not being selfish. It's not him being selfish. It's, look, he does his job the same as the shortstop does his individual job. And he's out there expecting to do it well, and he wants the ball, and he wants those consequences. Consequences are what make the game exciting and fun. And when we allow the player to say, this is on me, I'm the one in control, I've got the ball, and this is my destiny, that's a great thing. And lastly, baseball is a fascinating sport because of the intricacies, because of the nuances, because of all the little stuff that goes unseen. I appreciate more than anything reading hitters and trying to get a little bit of information to make my next pitch to the best of my ability. And those are things that I got better at every year until I couldn't play anymore, until I just couldn't put a jersey on my back because of injury. Those are the really fascinating things that we don't want to deprive pitchers of. If we call the game for them, if we do everything for them, they're losing that. They're losing that, like, wow, that battle of minds and will of, I'm reading you and I'm figuring out where your flaws are. I'm figuring out what you can't hit next, and we're going through this at bat together and competing. It's a special thing especially between great hitters and great pitchers. And we're depriving our pitchers of that when we call the game for them and don't let them do it. So I know this was a long video. I appreciate you watching. I hope you're still here at the end. And if you are, leave a comment below. Am I an idiot? Am I really smart? Did you like this? Do you feel like I missed a couple things? Let's start a discussion. Again, I think pitch calling in baseball for pitchers, it's something that I want to see changed. I don't want this being this blanket thing where pitches are called at every level from 8U all the way up. I think it's silly, and pitchers are smart enough and they want to do it. They want that those consequences. They want it on their shoulders, and it's their career and it's their life and it's their game to just grow into and learn all those little things. Baseball is really special, and I think pitchers should get as much of the experience to themselves as possible. Thanks for watching. Be sure to leave a comment below, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in my next video.